Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Paige Smith and I'm a student majoring in Communication and Media at Clarkson University. Today we are hosting a candidate conversation with Mary Rain, the Republican candidate for the St. Lawrence County District Attorney. Joining her in conversation are Donna Seymour of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women and Liam Hutton, Professor Emeritus of History at St. Lawrence University and a member of the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County. These nonpartisan conversations with candidates ask each candidate to explain their positions, records, and ideas. We look forward to a thoughtful and civil discussion of the issues. Welcome, Donna. Will you please get us started?
Thank you. Welcome to the second of our conversations with candidates for the position of District Attorney for St. Lawrence County. Mary, this is your first time at running for county-level elected office. What would you like the voters to know about your background and your experience that makes you prepared to be an effective district attorney?
Well, I started my career in 1984 as a police officer. During that time, I had the honor to be able to do special investigations into child abuse and rape. So I have extensive training in that area. When I was a police officer, I decided to go back to law school. I became a lawyer in 1995. Thereafter, I was hired as a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor for over 10 years and a police officer for over 15 years, full-time and part-time combined. And now I'm running for district attorney. I think my background as a prosecutor, as a police officer, also I do training with fire. I'm a New York State fire investigator trainer, and I'm also a trainer for the police. I'm certified in both fire and police.
Oh, okay. Now you say you've got some experience in prosecution. What were your experiences there?
We did everything from soup to nuts. Small departments always have, you're trained in doing everything. So I've done from vehicle traffic to murders.
Okay.
Just the whole plethora of different crimes that occur.
Okay. Liam?
We've heard that the workload, both in the public defender's office and the DA's office, is extraordinarily heavy. What would you do to try to make things more efficient, given the apparent fact that we have a hiring freeze, budget constraints, can't simply add lots more staff? It might be the simplest thing to do. How would you try to organize the work of the department to make it more efficient?
Well, as I said, I've worked in local government since 1984, so that's not a new issue for me. What I would do for this office is I would fast-track felonies. Fast-tracking felonies gets these cases moving quicker.
How would you do that?
You have to assess them quickly. First of all, for major crimes, I'd go right out to the crime scene. You have to be able to speak with your police, develop the evidence that you need, and make sure that it is collected and maintained. You start from the beginning so that you can move it more quickly through the court systems. This helps maintain witnesses, keep their memories fresh. It sends the guilty off to state prison more quickly, getting them out of our county jails and out of our taxpayers' roll.
There's another problem we've heard of, and that is a very high rate of turnover in public defenders' offices and also in the DA's office. To some degree, this may simply be the fact that it's people at the beginning of their careers who get into this position and move on. Do you think that's a problem? And if so, how would you address it?
Well, it's a problem more in the present office. I know that this county has several departments that house attorneys. The county attorney has attorneys, and they've been there for some time, one of them for almost 20 years. The public defenders also have attorneys, and some of them have been there 5 to 10 years. Conflict Defenders Office also has attorneys. They've been there 6 or 7 years. It's really the district attorney's office that has had the high rate of turnover. So it's a systemic issue. When I get in there, I'm sure I can address the issue and get it back on track to where it should be.
Okay. Donna?
Mary, since the beginning of this school year, there's been 3 separate incidents here in the North Country of schools where there was a threat of gun violence, and the schools went into a lockdown mode. Local media reports have also shown us there's an uptick in gun crime as it relates to drug trafficking. We know from national crime statistics that states like New York with strong gun laws have fewer gun-related fatalities But we know that guns and crime are an issue. What is your position on gun-related crimes and crimes where there are threats of serious violence?
Well, there are the lawful gun owners in our county and in our state, and there are the illegal gun owners in our county and in our state. You have to hit the violent criminals quickly and hard. If you allow the violent criminals to gain root in your community, they will continue to gaining root, creating havoc in your communities, and bringing in more crimes. So I want to be able to hit those crimes early. I've done it before as a prosecutor. You hit them early, you let other criminals know that we're a tough county and we will prosecute very quickly. We will not plea bargain down so that you're back out on the street again. We will not make bail recommendations where you're back out on the street again. We will stand tough on that, and we will ask our judges to also stand tough with us.
How are you going to do that in terms of, there's a lot of different judge, village, county, towns, city, that's a lot of judges to interact with. How do you plan to do that?
Well, you have to go out and meet with your judges. They have monthly meetings, the magistrates do. So you can go to the magistrates meetings. You can address your concerns with them as much as you can on what we call an ex parte communications basis. I mean, you can't talk specifically about specific cases,
Right.
but you can talk about issues happening in their various communities. You address them, you let them know what the issues are. And with the county court judge, again, he's aware of the issues that are going on in his office. And we can address that in court, give him the facts that he needs to be able to make a decision where there's either high bail or there is a significant state prison time. If the judges don't have the facts before them, they can't make a decision fully aware of all the facts. So it's important that the district attorney, like I said, when you go out to the crime scenes with the police, you know what the facts are. You're not coming into the court playing catch up. You're already there. So you are speaking to the judge and giving them the relevant facts. Judge, this is why I'm looking for a high bail. Judge, this is why I want an extensive state prison sentence. If you come in with the facts, I think the judges it won't be hard to sway.
Oh, thank you. Just to follow up on one of the things that you mentioned earlier, in terms of plea bargaining, we know that's a fact of life in our crowded courts. We don't have enough courts, we don't have enough judges. So in general, how do you look at plea bargains, apparently away from the idea of violent crimes, which you've already covered?
You know, plea bargains are a necessary evil. For instance, you have a 16-year-old who shoplifts. We don't want to send that person off to 1 year in the local jail. There are avenues to address that issue, and many people who commit crimes are first-time and only offenders. So you want to address those issues differently than you would address a repeat offender. A repeat offender, they've gotten their one break, and they've demonstrated that they probably didn't deserve that. So you have to become a little bit more tough in your stance when you're dealing with people who come into the court constantly.
Thank you.
I'd like to come back to this question about the multitude of judges and what looks to a layperson as a pretty complicated system. And I know some attorneys have suggested we might do better with a kind of consolidation, with a system of district courts rather than all the village and town courts. I mean, this is not the job of the DA to restructure the jurisdictional system. But what are your feelings about that? Do you think we could have a more rational and manageable division of labor among
Well, I think it's pretty rational right now, but the management of labor obviously would be easier for the district attorney's office if we had district courts, because instead of going to 33 local courts, we'd be going to maybe 3 or 4.
Right.
And that would make it more manageable for us, but I'm going to leave that up to the legislators.
Well, what's the resistance to that? I mean, what's the argument on the other side?
I'm not sure what the resistance is to it, but I'll leave it up to the legislators to figure out whether they're going to do that, because they do that downstate. They have district courts down in Westchester County and New York City.
That's where this opinion came from, actually.
Yes.
Fine. Okay. To shift to another area of the incarceration system, we've seen reports that the proposed closure of the Ogdensburg psychiatric facility may result in the incarceration of people who are essentially mentally ill rather than criminally disposed. That seems a very undesirable outcome. Is there anything that the DA can do to either address that problem or mitigate the worst consequences of such a situation if it happens?
Well, you have to be able to recognize as a DA what justice is. And it's not justice if you're putting somebody in jail because of a mental illness that created either an outburst of some sort, which you do see at the psych center, where we have cases that come into court right now because they have outbursts there, and they do come into court and it's addressed in court. But you can't do that for every patient. You need some kind of treatment program. As a police officer on the street, we had a mental health arrest that we could make where we didn't put him in jail. We put him into a psychiatric ward to have the professionals deal with the mental health issue. And obviously, if it's strictly a mental health issue, that's where we want to go. We don't want to put people who have mental health issues in jail because the jail staff they're not equipped to handle that. So we want to keep them with the mental health people, and hopefully we'll have facilities here even when the psych center closes.
And do you see a serious problem emerging? Is that something that people talk about in the law enforcement community as a crisis on the horizon?
Absolutely, because if you have no place to put mentally handicapped people or mentally ill people, you're going to put them in the jail, and that's just not an appropriate place for them. We want to make sure that they get the help that they need and they absolutely deserve. The other issue with the psych center closing down is you're taking away a lot of jobs, and when you start stressing out the economy like that, when the fiscal economy fails, unfortunately, crime rates go up.
Right, exactly.
So that is a concern.
Right. Now we get into the whole question of democratic politics. I mean, clearly the public has a role to play here, and more generally, the public has a role to play in preventing crime and in facilitating the work of law enforcement officers. This is not something that you usually hear DAs or other law enforcement people addressing directly. You're not political in that sense of the word. What can informed citizens of goodwill do to address these problems?
Well,
to make your job, or whoever's in your position's job, easier?
That is actually one of my points on my platform, is to have interagency cooperation. Interagency means not only police and DA, but also your local community. Messina knows best what's happening in Messina. Clifton Fine knows best what's happening in Clifton Fine. Ogdensburg people know best what's happening in Ogdensburg. If you go to Messina, you grab your law enforcement, you grab your local leaders or concerned citizens, you sit down with them in a forum type situation where you can address the current needs and the current issues that need to be addressed in that community as it relates to law enforcement and prosecution.
This is something you would see a DA doing?
Absolutely.
Sort of conducting town meetings, so to speak?
It's not necessarily a town meeting. It's
but
grabbing a
with
select...
representative leaders or whatever.
Representative leaders and saying, listen, how can we best address the issues in your community? If that had been done in Messina with the violence that had occurred there and the drug issues, I think it could have been much sooner addressed by the district attorney's office. And I think a lot of the crimes either could have been prevented or we could have more successfully prosecuted them quicker.
Okay. Mary, I want to skip back to something that you mentioned earlier when you were a police officer and your training in sex crimes and domestic violence and sexual assaults. This past weekend I was at an AUW conference in Geneva where we were looking at the topic of domestic violence and sexual assault. Dr. Kate Cerulli from the University of Rochester, who is a 30-year expert in the field, said about domestic violence that it's family social trauma that has been put into the criminal justice system, which is adversarial by nature. Given the recent discussions that we've had in this county by the various police agencies and the folks at Renewal House who actually provide services, how can the judicial system better protect and help families who are in this crisis system? Is prosecution the best solution, do you think?
No. Obviously, prosecution is not the best solution. If we can get in there and get counseling for the family so that they can develop the skills to assuage any anger issues or all the domestic violent issues that come up with that. Counseling would obviously be better, but it's the quick fix. Prosecution is the quick fix. We're going to go in and take care of the issue tonight because as police officers, I was called in. You're going in at midnight to take care of a domestic incident, and now there are mandatory arrest requirements, so that police are required to make arrests. Back in the old days when I first started, it wasn't mandatory, and we could make a decision whether we wanted to arrest or not arrest. And we could ask the offending party, usually the male, to leave the residence and cool off for the night. That can't happen now for several reasons. So now they have mandatory arrests. We can't ask the offending party to leave. He has the right to stay, or she has the right to stay. Prosecution is probably not the best answer, but it's the answer that I would address because I'd be the prosecutor.
Right.
I'm not a counselor. I don't work at Renewal House. It would be nice if the families could go to a crisis center like that and receive the help that they need. But as far as a prosecutor, no, it's not the best solution.
What changed? You say you no longer have the option of simply getting people out of the home. Was there legislation that outlawed that? Or
Court ruling
Court rulings, yeah.
outlawed it and said, listen, the man has the right to be at that residence just as much as the woman does. And just
Right.
because she's the
Unless he's
offended
under
party,
indictment for some, yeah.
right, and just because she's the offended party doesn't mean he has to leave.
Mhm.
He can stay there and she might have to leave.
Mhm.
We would ask the offending party to leave, and if they don't, then we just say to her, we'll help you leave if you want to leave.
Right.
And it's hard
Right.
because they usually have the children that they have to deal with, and it's hard to upplant kids at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right. Right.
But sometimes that's what happens.
Okay. To move from domestic violence to an issue that is often interrelated with domestic violence, that's drug use or drug abuse. How serious is the problem in St. Lawrence County? Is it getting worse? What can be done about it?
Extremely serious. It is getting worse. My plan is
The recession?
I don't know what it has to deal with. I just know that it is getting much worse, and I think it has to do with the punishment that they're receiving. I think
Which is too light?
I think it's too light and it's too long. It takes too long and it's too light. I think there are two types of drug users or drug arrests. There's the users and there's the pushers.
Right.
Obviously, as a prosecutor, I want to dry up the pushers, and that will help with the users. Right now, we have a couple drug court programs in St. Lawrence County that the users can utilize and help to get them off of drugs. Once they get off drugs, they're going to stop committing those crimes, and they're usually
Right.
property crimes, so they can get
Sure.
money to get drugs. That has been beneficial for many offenders, but when it's not beneficial, then we have to look at prosecution.
Right. I did some tutoring in correctional facilities, in Ogdensburg, and it was very clear most of these kids, most of them were fairly young, mostly minority. Vast majority of them in for for drug use of various kinds or petty crime to support their habit. These people did not belong in prison. It wasn't going to make them better people, and they weren't really a threat to society in the sense that we normally think of criminals as being. And speaking of jails, we were supposed to be making money off of our county jail.
Once upon a time.
The idea was we would be boarding guests from other counties, and that seems to have turned around. We're now paying. Our tax dollars are going to board our prisoners out. What went wrong, and can it be put right?
I think it can, and I go back to fast-tracking the felonies and interagency cooperation. If you start fast-tracking the felonies, again, it's going to put them through the court system much more quickly. If we can get them into the court system, and let me explain a little bit what happens when somebody is arrested for a felony. The prosecution has 6 months to decide if they want to indict that felony or not. During that 6-month time period, if the defendant is sitting in jail, he's just sitting there in jail. If we get to the indictment,
3 hots and a cot
exactly
at our expense. I mean,
exactly,
not pleasant, but not cheap either.
right, at $110 a day. If we can get them into grand jury much sooner, say in the first month or the first 2 months, that lops off 4 months of that time, and it gets it to county court much more quickly. County court then has their own timeline that they have through legislation and through their administration of the court system. They have to get it to trial much more quickly. So if we get the procedure going much more quickly, it's going to get them out of our county jails and off to state prison if they're guilty or if they're not guilty.
Right.
We're going to know quickly if we get it into grand jury and the grand jurors decide to no bill it, which means to not indict it.
Right.
Mary, I'd like to go back for just a moment, if we could, to domestic violence and the kinds of situations that families sometimes find themselves in. And I'm sure your police experience will speak to this, but we know that the crimes that actually get reported and then prosecuted are the tip of the iceberg, and that there's a lot of underlying issues that don't quite make it to the level of a report or even a prosecution. In your experience, what would you, how do you think that the unfavorable media reports that we see all the time about domestic violence incidences where a lot of family details are spilled by the media. Does that have a chilling effect on reporting? Are people less likely to either report a crime or go ahead and follow through with prosecution if they know that they're going to be subject to that kind of invasive media presence?
Yeah, and you know, we right now, the media pretty much protects any kind of rape victim or sexual assault victim. That protection is important. I also was a victim of a crime where I was stalked by someone, and the media was kind enough not to print my name to protect my privacy. That was important to me because at the time I was a prosecutor. And I didn't want people to come up to me and start talking to me about this case because I had given a detailed statement about the incident. But the statement was in the newspaper reports and in the TV reports, but my name was not. So it gave me some breathing room. And I think the same thing for these domestic violence victims where, you know, they don't want everybody knowing their business.
That's right.
They're going to be able to, people are going to be able to figure out based on who was arrested, who the victims are in the case. But I think if they give less details and just say that he was arrested for A, B, or C, that it will give the crime victim some breathing room. So having been in their shoes, I totally understand.
Yeah, well, and the ones that I'm even more thinking about here are children who may be going to school the next day after a report like that, and how difficult that is for kids because, again, as you say, in a small community, everybody knows everybody, and a lot of those details don't stay private for very long.
And it's devastating to them. I deal a lot with small victims, anywhere from 2 and 3 years old all the way up to teenagers.
Yeah.
Teenagers, as we know, are Facebooking and tweeting, and so their information is out there. Any kind of protection.
And we've had horrible problems with cyberbullying of various kinds without any of these complications.
So they already have a tough life as teenagers.
Yes.
They don't need this extra burden of my parents aren't getting along, my dad was arrested, and my mom, we had to go to renewal house or we had to go to a safe house. And they don't need this extra stress in their life.
You know, you bring up an interesting point that just in terms of the whole social media aspect of crime and stalking and things like that, that is getting to be a larger and larger problem, and I don't think the laws have necessarily kept up with the problem, so that might be another area that would sort of end up landing on a district attorney's plate that no one has really encountered before in many ways.
That happens all the time. The law does not keep up with technology, so it's usually about 3 to 5 years behind. When it finally does catch up, the technology changes, so the law has to then catch up again. And we see a lot of that with child pornography cases, that the law does not catch up. And hopefully it will spur the legislature to try to be a little bit more quick and responsive to these issues. But that's something the legislature has to deal with. And I can only implement or protect people with the crimes that I have.
Right,
Available
the laws
to
that
me.
exist. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, this whole thing about informational technology has both, on the one hand, created new crimes, as you mentioned, child pornography and the internet and so forth, and it's also created new techniques of organizing criminal activity. I had a friend of mine who said, in the old days, it used to, just talking about bringing up kids, in the old days it used to be the grown-ups were organized and the kids weren't. Now it's the other way around. But this also applies to the criminal community as well, in a sense. Have you noticed this? I mean, has it complicated the life of people in the legal profession and law enforcement profession? The use of cell phones, the use of internet connection. I mean, is that we know about cyber hacking and all of that. We know about international rings. But on the local level, do you find this is enabling criminals to more effectively coordinate their activities?
It absolutely does.
And defeat the opposition?
Well, it doesn't defeat us as prosecutors and police officers in the end, because we end up using the technology against them. So
How?
it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, if they have information on their texting,
Right.
that information, even though it may appear to be deleted on your phone, isn't. There are forensic tools that will.
And this stands up in court. I mean, this is.
Oh,
local.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, it's tried and true. Along with social media, I mean, we have people who are trained police officers out there indicating that they're somebody that they aren't, just so that they can get the criminals to open up to them on either Facebook or on chat rooms or on other social media type efforts that they go through to capture criminals. So the criminal may think that they're safe home,
Right.
sitting there with their computer, but there are the police officers who are out there diligently trying to find them.
So
that's
there's a
good
real
thing.
arms race, though, going on here. It's kind of
Absolutely.
leapfrogging going
Well,
on between
You know, the police
good
are
guys
getting
in the back.
the police are getting very good at detecting computer type crimes.
Really?
They, like I
Yeah.
said, they go out there and they have to actively search for these either child pornographers or sometimes drug dealers.
So law enforcement officials are having to get much more computer savvy than
Absolutely.
they were. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
become- yeah.
And they're doing a great job at it too. The prosecutors have to keep up with them because they also have to be trained
Right.
on
Right.
how to effectively present evidence like that into court.
Mhm.
So I'm fortunate enough to have some computer training as a prosecutor so
Right.
that if it comes to that.
So
I
here's a whole
certainly
new
can.
career field for computer savvy people.
Yeah, you
with
have
a
to be
public
computer
conscience.
savvy. You know,
Right.
when the kids ask, why do I need to take that in high school? I tell them prosecutors use just about all their knowledge because it's a huge base of knowledge. You need to know a little bit about DNA. You need to know a
Yeah.
little bit about computers. You know, there's all breathalyzer machines, weights and measures. There's just a whole
Right.
plethora of things that we
Yeah.
use from our high school days.
You have to be Renaissance people.
That's right. And
So
I've-
liberal arts education is still serves a
It's good, yes.
Right.
Well, in our remaining minute or so, is there anything that you would like the voters to know in summary?
Well, I want the voters to know that they can depend on me to ensure that they will be protected if they're victims or if one of their family members are victims. You know, if they're become a victim tonight or one of their family members become a victim tonight, I want them to know that I will respond to that. I will respond to them. I will be there for them, and I will prosecute their case to the fullest under the law. That, you know, there is no plea bargaining that could be worthwhile when it comes to major felonies such as murders and homicides and serious rapes and sexual abuses. Yes, plea bargains will occur on occasions, but that is more victim-driven than it is prosecutorial-driven. So I want the people to know that I'll be there to protect them and that they can feel a little bit more secure knowing that they'll have an aggressive prosecutor who will fight on their behalf.
Thank you. We also want to remind everybody to get out and vote.
Get out and vote.
Get out and
November
vote,
5th.
absolutely.
Yes, November 5th.
That we can agree
It's
on.
not very far away.
Hello again. I'm sorry, but our time is up. Thank you all. These candidate conversations are a production of the North Country Matters, produced here in the studios of WCKN on the campus of Clarkson University. This show is a collaboration between the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association University Women, the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, and the Communication and Media Department of Clarkson University. Until next time, remember, our North Country Matters.